We ask the question, what is needed in the world? Is that going to be?
Al-Shabab on the offensive. The attack in the Westgate shopping mall in Kenya's capital, Nairobi. It was revenge, the organisation says, for foreign involvement in Somalia. So what is the situation in that country? One of those foreign nations involved or touched by events here is Uganda. For years, the country has sent men and weapons to fight al-Shabab. We talked to the president of Uganda, Yoweri Museveni, one of the longest-serving leaders and most experienced politicians in Africa. But first, another man in the crosshairs, the UN Special Envoy for Somalia. He has the challenging job of bringing all UN resources to bear in an effort to dislodge Somalia from the hands of fighters and warlords. It may be a near impossible task, but for Nicholas Kay, it is, he says, the perfect job. So on this edition of Talk to Al Jazeera, al-Shabab, African politics and Somalia. Special Representative Nicholas Kay, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera. And can I start by asking you to put things in perspective? Somalia's had a recent bloody past. Where has Somalia been and where is Somalia now?
You're absolutely right. It's had a totally tragic 22 years during which the country has fallen apart, fragmented along clan lines, along regional lines, with enormous suffering to the population. But in the last 12 months, a little bit longer, 18 months, that really has changed, and the tide has changed completely. Out of a really, really dark and difficult sort of 2 decades, there is now some real light that's beginning to shine.
Before you got your UN job, you were a UK diplomat, and I know you've worked a lot in Africa, an Africa expert working in the Sudan, working in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Tell me what your comment was, your thought was, when you got this job.
Great. This is what I do. You know, I am a diplomat that likes things to be relatively clear-cut, if you like, relatively primary colours. War and peace, life and death. If you can make a difference to those things as a diplomat on the ground in these places, then you know that's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
And your impressions when you first landed in Mogadishu?
It's only once you get down to the old centre of the town, near the old fishing port, the cathedral, and you see two things. You see buildings that not a single building has not got a bullet hole in. It's all completely shot up and destroyed from the years of conflict. But you see the second thing as well, that this was once a very, very fine and elegant city and setting, and could be again. You know, now the fighting has stopped. As those buildings get renovated and restored, it will become again a glorious place.
Within days of your arrival, the UN came under attack. Tell us what happened on June the 19th.
On the 19th, I was meeting a group of young Somalis. This was youth groups from civil society in a restaurant just along the road from actually the UN compound that was attacked. And we were having a really good discussion. The conversation was interrupted by explosions and gunfire, and we carried on. We carried on talking. This was early days for me in Mogadishu, and I assumed that perhaps this was relatively normal. And it was only then, sort of after 10 minutes or so, that I learned what was actually happening. And then, of course, I immediately left that location and got back to the UN headquarters to lead the crisis response, and then it was a dramatic few hours.
And when you got to the compound and saw what had happened?
It's always affecting to see a location where your colleagues have died, and I visited the compound immediately after the activity had finished, and it was safe to do so. That was moving, but particularly moving was meeting the Somali guards who had actually fought very, very bravely and saved, in fact, the lives of all our UN staff. We suffered enormous losses if our Somali guards had not stood their ground and taken, I'm afraid, casualties themselves. I think 3 of them were killed in defending us, and several were wounded. The following day, the most moving was, of course, repatriating the coffins of the dead, and that's what brings it home. Intellectually, you can know that you're working in a dangerous place and that there are these risks. There's a gap between intellectually knowing that and actually helping load the coffins of your colleagues onto an aircraft. I said yesterday had been a bad day, today was a very sad day, but Somalia and the mission would know better days, and that we were there to stay and we were there to help, and we would be there till the job was done.
The attack just days after you arrived, probably deliberately timed. Do you think they were trying to kill you?
I don't think so, but you can never rule it out. I mean, al-Shabab, as we've just seen, recently in Nairobi, and the horrendous and absolutely callous, cold-blooded murder that they've carried out there. They clearly operate according to a moral standard that none of us would recognise, and to a logic which really sort of defies anybody's understanding. The Westgate attack was a very grim reminder, really, of the importance now of seeing through what has been achieved in Somalia over the last 2 years. And really, as I've said to the Security Council a couple of weeks ago here in New York, we are on the brink, on the verge of really achieving some great things in Somalia and helping the Somali people to enjoy a much, much better future. The challenge at the moment is security, and that is a challenge that is posed by this group of al-Shabab, and it's not a challenge that's beyond resolving. It has to be, I think, resolved militarily, politically, practically. I talk about a 3-dimensional campaign that's needed.
Tell me a little bit more about your view of al-Shabab now. How strong are they? How much territory do they control? Are they still active in the capital?
There will be a presence in the capital of sort of sympathisers, infiltrators, etc. We see it because of the number of attacks that happens there. And I'm very clear that you're not going to achieve security in Mogadishu unless you deny al-Shabab the territory that they hold outside Mogadishu. They don't control now major population centres, most of the regional centres, but they do control a lot of the countryside, and they still have access to the sea, and they control at least 3 minor ports, which allows them to import bomb-making equipment, explosives, weapons, etc., and allows them also to benefit from trade, illegal trade, etc., to finance themselves. So they're definitely down. They're certainly not out. Often I've described them, they're like a wounded animal, and when a wounded animal is cornered, they're actually not stronger, but they are more dangerous.
What are the links between al-Shabab and al-Qaeda in your estimation?
Well, all you have to do is read the pronouncements of al-Shabab, who have sworn allegiance to the deputy head of al-Qaeda back.
But is it a shared ideology, or is there command from one to the other?
It's certainly a shared ideology of the leadership now, and within al-Shabab, as you probably know, they've had their own leadership struggles, and Godani, the person who has come out on top, is absolutely sworn to an al-Qaeda ideology and a sort of global jihadist ideology. That's there. There are others within al-Shabab who have had a much more, if you like, nationalist agenda and have fallen out over that sort of difference of approach. But at the moment, those hardline, international leaning members are in the ascendance.
You talk about the splits in al-Shabab. Could there be negotiations with al-Shabab, just as they've tried to do in Afghanistan with the Taliban?
As I say, think there should be a three-dimensional campaign, and one of those dimensions is certainly political. The federal government itself has said very clearly that it would talk and is ready to talk to anybody who renounces violence. And I think that is an absolutely genuine and important offer. And I think there is also a task to be done with those members of al-Shabab. I mean, al-Shabab numbers, according to what I hear from the African Union forces, AMISOM, they estimate al-Shabab as 5,000 people. It's not a very large grouping, and of which I'm sure the vast majority are people who've joined for perhaps local grievances, certainly for lack of other livelihoods and economic opportunities and a certain sort of misguidedness. I'm sure many of those could be prevailed upon to give up. So I'm very optimistic that a political track is possible. I'm less optimistic that the leadership and Gadani himself at the moment is in any particular mood to negotiate with anybody.
Do you think as al-Shabab come under more pressure inside Somalia, there may be more attacks like the Kenya attack in neighbouring countries?
Yeah, I'm afraid that is a possibility, but that just reinforces again the need to actually tackle them in Somalia where they are now.
Who has the resources to do that?
Well, the African Union and AMISOM have been there and have achieved great things, but they are now lacking some resources, and I've been certainly pressing over the last couple of weeks for AMISOM to be provided with helicopters, which they need to do their mission, more armoured vehicles as well. And there is a potential that they will need a short-term increase in troop numbers. The Somali National Security Forces are also a very important part of the answer, and many partners, the United States, European Union, are doing some good work in building them up. But again, we haven't achieved really critical mass on that, and more effort needs to be put into building up the Somali forces.
So where are you going to get those extra helicopters, extra troops that you're asking for?
Well, I believe the helicopters can be found within Africa, and this is an African Union force, and there are African countries that do have them. And I'm a little mystified at the moment as to why they haven't been forthcoming. They've been provided for and budgeted for in the package of logistical support that the UN provides to AMISOM. So the funding shouldn't, from my understanding, be an obstacle. So it just does require countries to be prepared to offer. Sadly, the only helicopters that were offered by Uganda a couple of years ago, and unfortunately they crashed, all of them, into Mount Kenya as they were deploying to Somalia, and since then none have been forthcoming.
Uganda is one of the regional countries affected by the conflict in Somalia. Many Ugandans have died, soldiers fighting there in the conflict and civilians after attacks in Uganda itself. The president, Yoweri Museveni, says he's willing to continue fighting al-Shabab, but he's doing so while simultaneously facing questions about his own leadership at home. Some critics accusing him and his government of corruption, others say he's simply been in power for too long. But first, what does he think of the al-Shabab attack in Kenya?
That attack was horrible. However, it was not surprising. This is a direct consequence of the world preserving terrorism. When you allow terrorists to occupy free territory for years, then you are asking for something like that.
So what needs to happen on the ground in Somalia? You have a force there, AMISOM. You are the biggest contingent there. What does AMISOM need to do now?
We have cleared the towns, but we need more troops to clear the countryside so that there's no base.
More troops? Where are you going to get those troops from, and who's going to fund them?
First of all, we should have Somali troops themselves. They should develop their own army.
They're a long way off that, aren't they?
Yes, but in the meantime, we can raise troops from other countries and have enough force to clear the countryside.
Tell us about the enemy you are facing in Somalia. What is your view of exactly who al-Shabab are now?
The enemy are very weak. They are very weak. Why do I say they are very weak? The fact that they have been given free territory for 20 years. If they were a really potent force, they would have become very big by now. But they haven't. They just survive by default. They are not a strong force.
Can I move to your own country, Uganda? Yes. You have been there since 1986. You're one of the world's longest serving leaders. How would you describe the state of Uganda right now?
Well, Uganda has made very big progress from where we started off. We're just talking about the MDGs. We have achieved the MDG on poverty eradication, on primary school enrollment, on gender equality, on infant mortality. We still have some issues with the maternal mortality. We are still lagging behind. On HIV, we have done well, although new infections have started coming up again. But more importantly, the economy has grown and is growing.
What about the corruption?
Yes, there is corruption, but we know how to fight corruption. Like we fought all the other crimes before.
Last year, the claim that this aid money was stolen, 11.6 million euros.
Yes, the people involved were arrested. They're in court now.
So how did the system allow that to happen? And how do you need to change the system?
Well, there were, you know, Uganda had become more or less a failed state also. It was brought back by us. We rescued it. We were students in the 1960s who turned political and eventually we took power. Now, when we took power, initially we reformed the army. That's why you hear the Uganda army is quite exemplary. The civil service, we had not reformed it. So, although they were educated, they were not, unlike the army who were illiterate. For them, they were educated, but also they had quite a bit of corruption.
Now, so, some of your opponents make the claim that you or those around you are involved in corruption. There was the claim that 30 million British pounds in aid was used to buy a Gulfstream jet. That was supposed to be aid money. What did you make of allegations like that?
No, you see, Uganda has got its own money. We are now, external aid is only 18% of our budget now. So much of our budget is funded by ourselves. The planes, the managing of our army, the equipping of it, much of the infrastructure is done by our money, not donor money.
Is Uganda becoming a freer place or a more autocratic place? I talk about things like press freedom. The Daily Monitor newspaper shut down earlier on this year. I talk about things like gay rights, for example. Is it becoming a more autocratic country?
Not at all. Uganda is one of the freest countries in the world. One of the freest countries in the world. But freedom does not mean that you trample on other people's rights.
So why did you shut down the main newspaper, or your authorities shut down the main newspapers for some days?
Because they are very irresponsible. They attack other people's rights. They don't have professional responsibility. They are just open liars. That was the reason why we had to discipline them, but eventually we opened.
You've had several elections, the last three elections, where there have been claims of irregularities. What do you say to people who say that you weren't elected fairly?
Now, 1996, I got 75% of the vote. Now, if I was cheating, why did the other group get 25%? Where did they get it from? In fact, that time we even lost the whole province, showing the attitudes of the people there.
But in the last election, your main opponent during the campaign spent time in custody. That wasn't a free and fair election, was it?
No, that was 2006. because
Okay, I'll make the same point to you about that election.
he was breaking the law. It doesn't mean that when you break the law, when you are a candidate, you are above the law. Is that what it means in your country?
How do you see the political future of your country then? You've been in charge for a long time, 27 years.
The political future of Uganda is very stable. We have got a huge democratic network from the grassroots. Every village has got an elected council. Every parish, every sub-county, every district, we have got a huge supply of political cadres. There's no problem, no potential problem for Uganda.
Is your son a potential candidate to be the next president?
That man is an army officer. He's not interested in politics at all. Certainly he's not interested in politics in the short run.
But he might in the longer run?
That is up to him and up to the people of Uganda, but not in the short run.
Do you think if he was eventually to take over, that would send the wrong message? You talk so much about democracy, if there was some sort of hereditary transfer.
There can be no such transfer because Uganda is not a monarchy. We go through elections. There's no such transfer. Any leader of Uganda would have to go through a democratic process.
Can I take you back to when you first took power? Everyone knows that you rescued Uganda from a period where there was a lot of violence, a lot of repression. But at the time you wrote in your book, the problem of Africa in general, and Uganda in particular, is not the people, but leaders who overstay in power.
Yes.
With respect, after 27 years, have you overstayed in power?
Staying in power without elections. I am in power because of elections, not because of no elections.
So will you run again?
That is for our party and for me and my family.
But what's your personal view and what do your family think? Because you have spent so much of your life as a head of state. Aren't there other things that you want to do now?
Well, I spent quite a lot of my life as a resistance fighter. You have forgotten that part. You can say.
Well, I've read about that part.
You can say that I've spent the last 50 years in political struggles. And so that is for our party to decide.
What is your vision of Uganda and of your region and your continent over the next 50 years? If you could see 50 years in the future, what is going to be the future? What
I would wish to see is a modern Uganda with a very large middle class, a large skilled working class, industrialized Uganda, in a federated East Africa. We are aiming at the political federation of East Africa and in a common market of Africa.
You talk about a federated East Africa, one country eventually.
Yes, that's what we are talking about.
And what sort of time frame for that? And which members would be part of that?
Actually, we are working on it. Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi.
Removing perhaps those divisions that were created by those who were your colonial masters?
Yes, absolutely.
And do you think that is a way to provide peace to at least your part of Africa?
Not only peace, but to guarantee our future. To guarantee our future and to increase possibilities for our people, our citizens.
Economically, how will that then, what will that mean for
Economics means that when I produce something, the more people that buy it, the better for me. So if I am a manufacturer, if I am a farmer, it is better that I've got this bigger market. In terms of state sovereignty, East Africa can guarantee itself better than just Uganda or Kenya or Tanzania or Rwanda or Burundi.
And the wider issues of the continent, how do you see the future of the continent in the coming years? Is this Africa's decade coming ahead?
It is for sure. A common market for the whole of Africa. We are aiming at a common market for the whole of Africa. Then a federated East Africa would be a member of that common market, Africa is moving forward.
President Museveni, thank you very much for
Thank
talking
you.
to Al Jazeera.
Thank you.